Go.
Yes. We're good. We're good.
And action.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't give you the count in.
Just what's coming to mind around that, the hell thing from last time, is this idea of what's real, right? What's truth? What's reality versus what's just some kind of phenomenon, which is obviously the sort of the big question in philosophy, and the difference between spirituality and not is really about that, right? It's about, is there some real thing beyond what we as humans conceive or experience in what we tend to call
Our waking life.
yeah. So when you take that same general concept and you think about how we experience, right? And I think, as I was saying last time, if you hear really bad news, you're going to go to a place in your psyche, and the place you're going to go is going to be the place that people go. I mean, there's options, but let's say you go to this terrible grief horror place because you got news that loved ones are, have been killed or something. So even though you're sitting there in your room and you're safe, you might go into some place in your psyche that's terrible, right? You would have that experience, and it would be a real experience that you're having. And I'm saying that you would go to a dimension of the psyche and suffer that dimension. And then if you find out 10 minutes later, just kidding. It's like, well, then what? Like, wait a minute, but you just had a very real experience of this dark place you went to. And so it's like, well, wait a minute, what was that thing that happened then? Because you went to you had an experience, and are you sure it's not true? Because I literally had this bad experience. And it's like, no, there's not a correlation. Or I should say there's not one isn't causing the other. You can have the bad experience even if the bad thing didn't happen. You just imagined that it happened. And so it's an interesting thing, right? It's like, wait a second. The bad experience is there, even absent the bad occurrence. What does that say about human experience? Right? We're going around having these internal experiences that we think are caused by the external world, and we think that it matches, or that it's causational, or that it, and it's like, no, it's not. It's like, obviously people are having a huge variety of experiences in response to the same external occurrence. The certain Nazi soldiers were so horrified by what was happening they killed themselves. Other Nazi soldiers thought it was great, right? And it's like, well, what's going on there? Like, what's truth? What's the real thing?
Yeah.
Right? What's the correct way to respond? Right? If you're standing there, in 19 42 Germany at Auschwitz, you know, it's like if you and I are there watching it, my guess is it's just gonna be like, you know, it it would be traumatizing, right? To sit and witness what was happening.
Yeah.
But like it wasn't for some of them, or some people now could go back and they'd be, you know,
Mm.
fine or neutral, or they'd think it was great. And I'm just saying, like, okay, so we have all these different options in the psyche. As we know, it used to be that you know, take the family down to the public square to watch the, you know, the torturing of the criminals, right? Let's watch them get drawn and quartered. Let's watch them get hung. Let's watch them get disemboweled. Let's watch them get, you know, put through just absolute stuff that people today wouldn't be able to stomach. And so that question of, well, you know, was everyone a fucking monster back then, right? Were they, you know?
Yeah.
And so it just brings up this question of like, well, what's the real? What's true? How should we respond? How should we see ourselves and see behavior and see, how do we figure out what's good and what's bad? Because there's been a massive shift in the experience of that and the judgment of that, even in the, you know, the last little blip of human history thus far, right? Because as we know, it's like, you know, you go back, you know, 100 years or even 1,000 years, and it's minuscule compared to history, right? And so my understanding is all the way through until like practically, you know, yesterday, like public torture was fine. Like there, you know, that wasn't horror.
Right.
And it's like, well, what happened? You know, it brings up the question, what's real, what's true, what's good? And also like, well, what happened that now we think that's bad? Why was slavery a thing? Just a common part of human experience, seemingly in every culture throughout time until yesterday. And so what happened? Did we wake up? Did we go to sleep? Did we, you know, get some kind of download in our psyches that made us shift, you know, like what happened? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, you know, that seems to be the way it always is, that even just generation to generation, it's like you can't believe what the generation that's older than you thought and did, and, you know, in certain ways. And it's just like, God, they're just fucking idiots, right? And it's like, well, you know, I think it's very complicated in certain ways. I think we were waking up. I think we get exposed to not just different circumstances, but I think there are higher frequencies of consciousness that come in. But there's also backtracking, and, you know, and it's not just each generation's better or more awake. There's ways that I think, you know, it goes the opposite direction. And so it's just very complicated. But again, when you come in, just that thing I'm always saying, where instead of just operating according to your cognition and your idea, you know, and then here's what's fucked up and here's what's okay, and slavery was bad, you know, this is good, but, you know, and it's like as though now you've arrived at the correct perspective, and now you're going to critique all the other perspectives throughout time.
Yeah.
Because they don't jive with your current, you know, place from where you're sitting and looking at the whole thing. And so obviously the awareness that, well, wait a second, where you're looking from, where your society, your culture, your race, your, you know, species is looking from isn't necessarily some kind of absolute truth. So, okay, fine. So what do you do about that? Well, one is you don't be such an ideologue and judge history and judge every person or every act or every race based on your current perception. You try to have more of a integral view, right? But then on an individual basis, what does it mean to allow for the fact that, wait, what I'm experiencing to a very large extent is just my internal workings that are much more painting my experience of my external reality than my external reality is painting my internal experience. So, if you put
and like a kind of like projection.
Yeah. If you have red tinted sunglasses on, you're pretty sure that the room's red because you're literally seeing it as red. And it's like, yeah, but Jeff, you're looking through a lens that's coloring it red.
Yeah.
You're like, no, I can see it. It's red. It's like,
yeah.
And we're all doing that. You and I, as we sit here right now, what lenses are we looking through?
Right.
Because the tendency is, no, I'm looking through a clear lens. And it's like,
right.
No, you are not.
Right. But it's like the delusion based on like shared like vocabulary about it.
Yeah.
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 It like reinforces the idea that it's like an objective lens because someone else describes it the same way, right. Even though it's just as individualized and specific to that experience.
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting, like we're going to talk about like canceling. Like canceling is when that lens gets called out,
right?
Or the subjectivity of that lens.
But it gets called out as bad.
Right. So you stepped out of the delusion for a second. You're bad.
Yeah. So my understanding, and what the dimension approach thing is that I have the clear lens. No. So let me explain what.
So this episode's done.
Yeah. It seems like what I'm calling consciousness seems to be the clear lens. Is my sense. Now, I don't know what reality looks like through that conscious lens. I only know, if I was trying to describe it, I'd say I have a felt sense, which I, and this is what I think people feel. My felt sense of that experience, that like, if we say there's such a thing as 100% conscious, right? But none of us can handle that. So what's the felt sense of it? It's like, well, the felt sense of consciousness is bliss. And well, what's the sort of affect, or what's the, let's just say affect. Or what's the desire? What's the mood or whatever? It's like, well, it's love, right? And well, what's the mental experience of it? And it's like, well, it's compassion and understanding and acceptance. And again, it's like, well, those are experiences that are happening via consciousness, or as a result, in the same way that if you said, well, what's the experience of the sun? It's like, well, I don't know how to explain the experience directly of the sun, but I can tell you that to me that it's bright, and it, you know, I have this experience via my eyes where the light from the sun bounces off stuff, and so it illuminates my world, and I feel warmth from it, right? It warms my body. And it's like I'm not the sun, but I seem to live via the sun to a large extent. The sun is making all this stuff happen that enables me to stay alive. And if you take the sun out of the picture, then you take me out of the picture and everyone else, right? My understanding is if the sun was suddenly gone, you know, the earth would you know, among other things, it would no longer be orbiting the sun. It would, I don't know, I guess it would just take off in whatever direction it was traveling.
If it just suddenly, disappeared.
Yeah. And it would immediately be a frozen chunk, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm just saying consciousness, I think that there's that kind of experience. So as I sit here and say, well, to what degree am I conscious and am I experiencing consciousness? It's just these, what's the word? There's all these degrees of latency, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just think if we understand that and allow for that, and then, okay, it decenters the ego, right? Because we tend to operate as though our cognitive ego is the origin. And to do that is to be in a very narcissistic state. So if there's that general model that we don't really know what reality is, our experience of reality is heavily painted by the lenses we are looking through, and the idea that our internal experience is really all we have. That's the Cartesian view, right? And my sense is, well, that's true of the ego, but simultaneously we have access to consciousness, which does experience beyond just your internal ego state, which defies classical physics. You know, so as you and I sit here, it's like, well, there's your internal experience. And in the same way that, like, you can feel right now, you can pay attention to the inside of your mouth. And it's like, oh, there's this little, you know, environment there. That's a dimension. And okay, and you might have a sore tooth, or, you know, you might be chewing gum, or, you know, whatever. But there's what's going on in there, right?
Yeah.
And then simultaneously there's out here. So you can be experiencing inside your mouth and you're paying attention out here. And it's like, okay, well, which one's primary, or which one's real, or which one, you know, are we talking about right now? And how much does it matter? Right? And it's like, well, you could say, well, look, if there's something really super painful in your mouth, it's like, well, there might be something wrong. There might be something bad going on. And so it matters, you know. You shouldn't just ignore the pain. But you also shouldn't conflate that, for example, I'm doing something to make your mouth hurt, right?
Mm.
It's like, no, like, if you have stabbing pains in your gut right now, is something stabbing your gut, or is it coming from the inside?
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
And we need to obviously discern this, and we do it pretty well on the gross level.
Right.
But on the subtle level, we are not discerning that
At
very
all.
accurately.
Yeah.
We're having whatever the experience is be the real, and we're making assessments as to causation that are wildly off base, very
Okay.
often. But so again, if you just kind of accept that and allow for that okay, wait a second, I don't know, I don't really know what the truth is. I don't know what reality is. I don't know what is truly causation. And it's like, well, where does that leave you? Well, that leaves you in a confusional state.
Mm.
Which is, by the way, the truth of the ego. Ground the ground state for the ego is confusion. It's chaos. It's insanity. That's the ground state. The ego doesn't know shit. To start with.
Yeah.
Right? It can organize chaos into this or that, and then say that's the real. Right? And it's like, is that the real? Or is that, did you take a bunch of pieces that were really in chaos, and then, you take a bunch of Legos and you build a little thing, and then look at that, now that's a thing. And it's, it's this creation organization process, right? That's pretty awesome. We can start with chaos, and we can organize into structure.
Yeah.
But what's the real, right? And that's the whole phenomenology, ontology argument. If you build the little, castle out of the Legos, is the castle real? Right? Or is the just pile of chaotic Legos the real? And that's where you get into the idea of ideal objects. The idea of ideal objects is that they exist absolutely. There's no chaos that you can deconstruct the ideal object down into. With ideal objects, they are there in their form from the get-go. And this is my understanding. This is like for Plato, this is what a Platonic solid is. Seems like Plato's who always gets mentioned with regard to ideal objects. For Almas, he's using the word essence and essence points and soul structures, that they are soul structures as opposed to ego structures. So if that's true, if there's such a thing as these ideal objects that are very, very different from ego objects, and the idea is that physical matter is an ego object, right? So we're not talking about a gross physical ideal object, right? We're talking about something that's of a whole different nature that that pre-exists the ego objects, but that the ego objects are, again, extrapolations. They are they are refractions. So like the idea of white light that is full spectrum, but then you can refract it and, you know, turn it into all these colors, right?
Yeah.
But the color itself isn't the real, isn't the whole. It's a portion of. So you create different shades, you create different tints, you create different intensities out of the original real, right? For example, if you say the sun is an ideal object, everywhere you're looking around and seeing light, and you know, that's all via the sun, but that's not directly the sun. You're just seeing this little effect that the sun is having.
Yeah.
So the whole idea of awakening, as I understand it, is a movement back towards these ideal objects. What is the ideal object that underlying any particular experience? And then you can get, you know, just the simple model is there's the real self and then the ego self. But then there's all these models of well, there's actually a whole bunch of different little points that are ideal object points or essence points, you know, in your system. There's a whole anatomy of that that's in various cultures. Almas pulls a bunch of his essence point stuff from Sufism. My understanding is that Sufism has a real developed, complicated map of what they call latayefs. So our experience at any given moment, it's, well, how close to the ideal object is it an expression of versus how much distortion, how much latency, how much conversion. And generally speaking, we're impacted in a very positive way by soul, by essence, by the ideal, right? It impacts us in a way that is good, that is, you know, we're drawn to it. We experience it as beingness. And another part of that model is that it's there all the while. Like we don't create real self. We don't create the ideal object. It's there already. It's more that you try to discover it or you try to reconnect to it, right?
Yeah.
Which again is a different model than how do I go out and find it?
Right.
Or how do I produce it? And generally speaking, it's like, well, almost every spiritual path out there says the same thing, which is, well, first you got to quit being so all about the ego.
Yeah.
You gotta accept that it's not out there. That it's in you. And you got to accept that the experience, what's the experience of not being in touch with it? And that's generally a universal, that if we're going to be honest, what's the experience of not being in touch with it? It's hell.
Yeah.
Separation, isolation, emptiness, nothingness, chaos, horror, pain. It's terrible being separated from it. In the same way that what's it like to be blocked from the sun? It's dark, it's cold, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't be too separated from it or you die. And then of course the big trick, the big joke on us all is it's like, well, it's in you. So no matter how separated your awareness is from it, that doesn't mean it's, it disappeared in you. It's just that your awareness of it is blocked. Well, how do you get back to unblocking it? Well, you bring your attention to how blocked you are. What does that look like? It looks like ignorance, arrogance, narcissism, hatred, judgment, right? Anything, any external thing that you fucking hate, that you wish would die, that you wish would go away, that you want to kill, that you wish never existed, right? And what the mind does around that, right? You want it to fucking go to hell, right? Get that out of my reality. Right? That's this universal experience of we want to be rid of whatever. And I'm not, obviously, it's like cancer. It's like if I could, and of course I have no idea what effect this would really have on the whole, but the first thought is like with cancer, it's like if I could push the button and make cancer be gone from this fucking reality, it seems like, well, we should do it, right? Push the button, for God's sake. Condemn cancer to hell. Get it the fuck out of our world. I don't want anyone to have cancer ever. And it's like, well, A, I don't get to make that choice. B, there's probably a place for cancer that I don't understand. It's probably infinitely more complex than I even have a fucking clue about. But yeah, I'm aware that in my mind, it's like, I want to close my mind and say, I condemn cancer to hell. Get it out of this reality, right? It's not allowed in the world that what we call life, right? And that's just like killing something. It's like there's an attempt to make it either make it cease to exist. Depends on how you view what your cosmology is, but it's like if you kill something, you either think you're making it cease to exist or you're banishing it to a different realm, right?
Yeah.
Not allowed to exist or be present here in this realm. And so we have that mechanism in our mind, if you will, where we're all walking around banishing shit to hell in our own mind, right? Because you can only tolerate a certain portion of reality. You can only allow a certain portion to exist in your psyche before you're too scared or you're too possessed or you're too overwhelmed. And I can only allow a certain amount in mine. And when we're hit with, stuff that doesn't match our thing, then we suffer and we try to defend and deny and get away and project and repress and distort because we're all trying to maintain our little version of what seems tolerable, what doesn't fuck with us too much with regard to, because we're all very, very concerned with okay, I'm good. I'm one of the good ones. I'm not one of the bad ones, right? Like that's of utmost, and then I'm valuable. I'm not one of the non-valuable things. I'm valuable. I have value, right? And I'm in touch with reality. I'm sane. I'm not insane. There's people that are insane, but I'm sane. Right?
Yeah.
Like we're all constantly trying to maintain that.
Yeah.
I'm alive. I'm not dead. And, gosh darn it, people like me.
Right.
And it's like, what a fucking joke, what a joke. Like you look out at a sea of people, I was at the state fair,
month ago
or whatever, and I'm looking out to see people, and the person I was with, we were joking, like, it just looks like infinite people, even when you're just sitting there looking at a crowd, let alone, and it's like every last one of those people is just a melodramatic shit show of needs and emotions, and every last one of them. And every last one of them thinks that, like, their little likes and dislikes, or experience is
the universe.
What's that?
Is the universe.
Is the universe, yeah. And it's like, well, and it's easy to say, and none of it fucking matters at all. And it's like, well, wait a minute. I think from a certain perspective, it looks like that.
Right.
But then I think simultaneously there's a way that no, every little nuanced experience of every last one of those little people is somehow super important.
Yeah. It's just, what is it an expression of? Like, what's the context for what it's an expression of?
Yeah. Yeah. And so that idea that, okay, can you start to distill it down with all these little people? Are they, just like in the physical world, it's like, okay, all these little plants that are, it's like, okay, but they all have these root systems, and then the root systems are all anchored into a water system, and it's like, oh, you start distilling it down and it all starts to come from one thing.
Right.
And so depth in the human psyche, like what happens when we go in and down? We start moving back towards source. But just like in the physical world, it's like, yeah, but if you start digging down towards the center of the earth, there's an experience of going away from the sun.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, wait a minute, that seems bad. We should only try to go up. Right?
Yeah.
Only go towards love, only go towards light, only go towards bliss. Don't go down towards pain and darkness and separation. It's like, well, but wait a minute, is there some value in going down? And is there some kind of thing that happens if you bring the sunlight down into the depths? What happens then? And what's ultimately down there in the depths, right? And the general idea with ideal objects, as I understand it, is what you're going to arrive at an ideal object. And the ideal object is, so the analogy would be, the sun is the giver of light and heat. And so on the surface of the earth, we know that. And so we're absolutely dependent on the sun. And if we dig down, or go down into a cave or something, we're very aware that there's nothing but darkness and cold. And it's like, yeah, but if you go deep enough, you'll arrive at something very similar to the sun. You'll arrive at fire and light, right? Because the core of the earth is not a cold, frozen mass. It's a fireball, just like the sun. It's like, oh, well, wait, that's, so it's more complicated than just the sun is light and heat and the earth is cold, right? Now, if you take the sun away, the earth, the fire in the earth will go out. But the fire in the earth is produced by the sun. And so the analogy is, I have a fire in me, you have a fire in you. And if we go deep enough, we encounter it. And it has a similarity to the light from above. So ideally, we're in touch with the fire within, but we remain aware that, look, that fire within is produced by that. And if you just go do that and you separate from that, right, then you have hell. Because the way our psyche works is that fire all by itself just means destruction of all the structures above it. Like a volcano erupting, that lava is going to destroy anything in its path. But so if I go in my mind and start looking directly, start going in the direction of that molten core, like I start to feel psychotic, I start to feel demonic, I start to feel destructive. And I'm just aware that, okay, that seems to be the vibe, that seems to be the frequency. And and I look at it, but when I'm consciously looking at it versus it's possessing me and I need to behave it, it's just kind of like, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, I want to like set the world on fire. I want to like just, it's like, it's like, oh, most of the evil monsters I see in movies, it's like, yeah, it feels like that. And it, and it's like, well, what does that mean? Am I supposed to go do that? Am I,
Right.
Like, okay. Like, is that really, we're supposed to just go try to, kill everything like some monster in some movie, that I'm just supposed to go sort of tear everything to shreds and eat it and dominate it and, just wreak havoc.
Right.
And it's like, well, I don't know. That doesn't seem, at the moment, I don't feel particularly, possessed by that.
Yeah.
It seems like, seems like a lot of work. Not sure what the reward is.
Right.
Seems like a bunch of people would get hurt. I don't really want, a bunch of people to get hurt. So it's like, well,
how are you not, like, was there a time you were more split off from it?
Oh, for sure.
So I think, like, what's that, like, because the it's like the fear of the embodiment of it versus the awareness of what the embodiment of it is.
Yeah. Huge issue.
Yeah.
And I think that just generally speaking, you could say that there's the people that have been touched by it and the people that have not.
Yeah.
Like virgin or not a virgin. Activated is another word, right?
And that's something, you've talked about that not that long ago, as far as like seeing that in people when they've been activated or not.
Right. You can feel it. Yeah.
But that's what you're talking about. Like, just kind of reiterating.
Yeah.
This is the thing you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it ruins. I think I've said this before. I was talking with my dad a couple of years ago, and we were just talking about evil. And I think I was asking him, what's his view of evil and all that? And he was saying he thinks it's a real thing and it's a force that it seems to exist in the world, and that it's in everyone, but not everyone knows it, and that he knows it. And he was telling a story that he feels like he thinks he was around 12 years old, and he grew up on a farm, and he was trying to get the hogs to like go through the little channel they were supposed to go to get back in the pen or whatever.
I'm so worried about what's going to happen.
Your psyche can't handle.
No, I'm gonna be all right. I'm just
no, it's nothing terrible.
No, you don't have to spoil it. I'm along for the ride. I'm just
No, he just said that of course they weren't cooperating. And at a certain point, he got so angry that something happened, and it was like a darkness. It was like in a movie where suddenly, Satan rose up out of the, you know, he opened a door to hell in his mind, and not, of course, he didn't intend to, but it's like that happened. And he said he's never been the same since. And he's wrestled with it, basically every moment of his life since. And it was moving to me because I see it in him, and I know that experience in me. And I didn't know that experience in me until, a certain point in my life. But I always saw it in him.
Yeah.
And now I know it in myself, and it was moving to me to, because I had, where I once, as a kid, I never went into complete my dad's bad, but I certainly saw that thing as bad.
Yeah.
In him, and I saw that he was one of the people that had the bad thing in him, and my mom did not, for example. And so my mom was better in a certain way than my dad. And I love my dad, but my dad was, he was one of the sort of people who had evil in him. And I didn't even think about it in these terms back then. But when I look back, that was the case.
That's the feeling.
Yeah. And so when I was having this conversation with my dad a few years ago, we started talking about, let's talk about our extended family and who has it, activated and who doesn't. Yeah. And I mean, we were exactly the same. It was like, this person, yep, this person, nope. And we just both like exactly, went through it. And then he made a statement that I thought was very accurate and moving to me when he said it. He said, and you can't, it's in everyone, but you can't make someone, just become aware of it or wake up to it.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah. And he said, and plus, if you do, then you've ruined them. Which, it made me want to cry. It makes me want to cry right now. Because you're empathetic. Like you would have to, what it feels like. And it's like, you wouldn't wish that on someone. You wouldn't wish it on.
Yeah.
And I suffer it, and my dad suffers. And so I felt empathy from my dad when he said that, because he feels ruined by it, and he doesn't want to ruin anyone who's not ruined by it.
Yeah. It's like a fall.
Yeah, right. But I think it's tragic by nature, and I think it's tragic that we don't recognize the truth of it. We live in a world where we're denying it. So there's all kinds of people right now that are in touch with that. They feel it, and they just think they're bad, and they just suffer.
Yeah.
And they think no one else has it,
What does it look like to you when you see it?
Hell. It looks like, demonic. It looks like, just the nature of evil. Fire, cruelty, non-compassion, condemnation. It looks like that. And the experience of it, there's that sort of principle or whatever that the person that's in that state that hates, they also seem to hate themselves. I think we've all experienced it, that when we are in a state of hating something, we think that like it's juxtaposed against the love we have for ourselves. And it's like, when you got those hate glasses on and you look at yourself, you know, you hate yourself as well.
Yeah, it's not a reach.
Right.
It's not like some, oh my. Like it's, yeah. Not where did I come from? Or where did this come from? It's like, what is this person saying that I'm telling myself? What is this person doing that like you said, that I'm like fighting against in myself?
Yeah. Right. So my experience is it's a level shift when you are faced with that ruin, you're faced with the loss of innocence. And it's like, well, what now? Should you kill yourself? Should you just be evil and go behave the dark stuff? What's left? What's after the ruin, right? And it's a terrible experience because there's a period of devastation that occurs. And I think in Christianity, Noah and the flood is the shift. Everything is ruined as far as that phase. If each story in the Bible is a phase of the consciousness journey, and there's a starting over from a different ground, from a different level of consciousness. The self is different. The previous self seems to die. And you could say that each animal on the ark is an ideal object. So everything else is let go of. Only the ideal objects are kept, would be a loose interpretation. And my experience is that once you do that, once you die in that way, then the hell and the aggression and the hate and the condemnation, it's still there, but it's just accepted. You're no longer in the same fight against it. You're no longer, like you said a minute ago, fighting it in the other as though you're not fighting it in yourself. You become aware that you're fighting it in yourself as much as anything else. And you become aware that even if the world did it exactly as you would have the world do it, you're still confronted with that thing in you.
You have the same formation of the problem.
Yeah. And we've all seen that it seems that the more the world does do it as you would have it, right? The more rich and famous and idealized a human is, the more they tend to descend into their own hell. Right? It seems to have that impact.
It's like the world begins to mirror for you, like in a way that it wouldn't. Like this, if you happen to, like you said, get things the way you want it.
Yeah.
We don't always get that same experiment.
Right.
People don't often get that opportunity for the world itself to be a mirror to their own, like physically be a mirror to their own experience.
Right. So the idea of internal, what's going on internally, and then the idea that, well, there's a general structure to that. There's a hierarchical series of experiences. There's different maps out there that are about that journey. Archetypes and shamanism and alchemy and totems and tantra and, you know, all the various esoteric mystical models are about, you know, about that journey of consciousness. And the thing that we're so tasked with in modern culture is the level on that journey, the level that has to do with the ego mind and individual self. And what is truth? What is meaning? What is right? What is valuable? We're in a questioning of all that. In previous levels, we knew what was good and true and right. It was there presented to us, and we bought it as absolute truth. Whether it was our religion or our state or our family, or, you know, we weren't questioning it, is my understanding. But in modern society, we're awake in a way that now we're questioning it. In the same way that in an individual life, at a certain age, you know, you were just in your body and you were just in your family and you just were operating by a bunch of given norms that you weren't even aware of, you were just aware from them. Right? And then as you get older, you start being aware of them. And once you become aware of them, it's like, well, you better go right to work and at convincing yourself that those are the good things. Right? Because if you become aware of them and think they're bad, well, then you're in trouble. So we're all very motivated to, you know, when we become aware of it, well, that's the right thing. But then you get a little older and you become capable of maybe allowing and tolerating or being confronted with, okay, maybe they're not the good things. Maybe they're not even real. Maybe they're not even true. Maybe they're actually kind of fucked up. Right? So, and then it's like, oh, welcome to the world of shame. Right? And it's like, how is that a developmental achievement, right? It's like, well, it is. If you're not capable of shame yet, you know, then you're just at that lower, just sort of monster aggression level, right? It's like, yeah, but shame takes people out. People are killing themselves, you know, right now as we speak because of shame. Whereas a bunch of us would look at that and go, no, you don't need to. We're not seeing you that way. You know, we're not seeing you as bad. Or, hey, you're not, you know, okay, yes, you're kind of bad, but so are we. Like, let's get a grip here.
Yeah.
But obviously it's powerful. And I think humans in general are not very far past that, you know. We're not very far past just the naked aggression to the, okay, wait a second, what are we doing? We're hurting people. How do we live and not just live by aggressing at other people? What does that look like? What does a society or civilization look like when it's not just about living off of and taking advantage of others. It's like, well, initially, what does it look like? Oh, we all just feel terribly, terribly ashamed, depressed, anxious, self-loathing, and we start to self-destruct, which is, again, it happens to the individual at a certain age, and it happens, I think it's happening in this country. If you just take the sort of the United States and talk about the life journey of the United States, like we seem to be in a very self-critical, right? The culture is very anti-America. And then there's ways that, okay, some of the critique is valid, and then some of the critique is unfair, and and then there's a self-destructiveness that's not good, right? Because just like the individual ideally develops the capacity for shame, develops the capacity for self-reflection, right? Self-reflection brings shame initially, but does one get so caught there that they self-destruct, or is it integrated constructively, and there's a movement to a higher order?
Yeah.
But I think
not if you just obsess over what causes the shame.
Yeah, right. So in the same way that if you go back even just a few hundred years, we were trying to root out evil, right? The devil is in so and so, kill them. Because let's get rid of the evil, right? If we just kill all the people that the devil is in, maybe there can be no more devil, no more evil. And then there became more of an awareness of, okay, wait a second, maybe that's not how it works. And now it's more like, well, if we organize society in a utopian way, there won't be any evil, because evil is all a result of social construction. And so, if we just cancel all the bad stuff and insist upon the correct way, then we will do away with, then we'll erase hate. And it's like, okay, I think that's very foolish, because I think there's a denial of the evil, denial of the suffering, denial of the tragedy, denial of death, that is gonna backlash, and is backlashing. It's backlashing in the form of anxiety and depression and suicide, backlashing in the form of political dividedness, et cetera, et cetera. But facing the hell, facing the evil within, dying to it, accepting the tragedy of that, accepting that it ruins the world and it ruins you. It ruins your, it ruins the idea, right? It shatters. We seem to be born with the awareness of the ideal, and we live by it early on. As soon as we start becoming awake and aware at all, or start talking, our psyche orients towards this ideal, and the promise of it. and the idea that we somehow deserve it, or we're going to get it, or we're going to be united with it, or it's going to come and take care of us, or and when a human being is confronted with the experience of that being shattered,
Yeah.
it's bad news. It's it's devastating to the person's sense of self and sense of life, and it leaves one in a very cold, dark place. And it's hard to say, yeah, that's a developmental achievement,
Yeah.
because it doesn't seem like it. And when you're in that space, it seems like there's no hope, because you literally look around and cannot see goodness, can't see hope, can't see a reason. Even if you're living in the lap of luxury.
Yeah.
And then, well, what happens? What happens from there? What can happen? Why do some people seem to come out the other end of that? Right? Why do some people seem to transcend it? Or, what is it? Is it a transcending? Is it a dying? Is it a working your way out of it? Is it a, and it's like, well, it's kind of all that,
Yeah.
in that. But somehow the simple idea is, if you accept and allow the death and the nothingness, the hell that was below starts to not matter. Yep, the hell's there, but where the hell was once terrifying and overwhelming, who cares now? So now it's just nothing. But then somehow, the more that one's psyche allows nothing, then the more something emerges in awareness, and it tends and that thing that emerges is the ideal. The ideal object. And you can talk about which ideal object. Well, it depends on which dimension. Like if you say there's an ideal object to every dimension, right? So it depends on which dimension you were dying in.
Yeah.
And I think there's a map of, there's an anatomy of that, and some dimensions are more primary than others, impact us more than others.
Yeah.
So as far as that list of those things, the reason I rattled off that list that day was that you see how they're all kind of related to the depth psychology world.
Yeah. Just this like potential for erupting. Like there's this. Yeah, it's just the holding kind of like those different things at the same time feels chaotic, feels like confusion. Not just because like I don't know all of them like conceptually
right,
super well, but just the directions in which, I mean, just the last thing you said, that like, well, every dimension has an ideal object. And it's like, well, fuck that. Like that's aggravating as fuck. But just the unconscious attachment to an external ideal that like dies, or like fails.
Yeah.
And then the that was just striking. And it sounds like cliche, but there's just something about that that feels how prevailing that like reliance is unconsciously.
Mm.
Maybe it's just for me, I don't know. But it just there's a way in which like the want to be cared for externally, and how unconscious that dependence is initially, and that to die to that is to like you said, it's like, I mean, there could be shame, but it's also just like hopelessness.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if I'm waiting for, the spaceship to come, it doesn't come.
Yeah.
And then the um we were talking about the other day, just like just the aloneness that comes with that, and that it's through that something else has to arise from within. And it's not like arising, but like you said, it's like reconnecting, or it's unblocking. But it's like the ego would rather like keep hoping for that structure where somebody else is going to take care of it.
Yeah.
At least in my own pattern. Like it's very yeah, it's just like a rage at that death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's that poem that the rage at the dying of
Against the
the,
dying of the light.
yeah.
Rage against the dying of the light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think if I was going to try to interpret that poem, my sense of it is that the the idea is, don't think you're going to prevent the dying of the light, but go ahead and rage at it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's an attempt to don't let that happen.
Yeah.
I think it's
Lament it.
stating see that's how it works.
Yeah.
Because it's an interesting paradox, right? That like accept the death and simultaneously rage
Fight it. Yeah. That's the part that just feels explosive to me.
Yeah.
Like through all these discussions of like the dialectic of life and death, or hate and love, or
Yeah.
there's just something that
And do you feel how when you think about raging against the death and an awareness that the death is going to happen? I mean, movies are made of this, right? I mean, we see, because what's our experience when we see that, when you see a person, for example, take on a fight and fight with everything they've got, knowing that it's just a matter of time before they're going to lose and die.
yeah.
But yet they keep fighting. It makes your heart open up, and there's compassion and a beauty,
Yeah.
and the tragic hero, idea emerges in us.
Yeah.
And we don't cease to love that person because they can't win.
Right.
So the Christ symbology, you know, and that myth, that mythological constant, right, of the where it shifts from the epic to the tragedy, you know, it shifts our experience of self and of what winning is, you know.
Yeah.
It's transcendent. We literally transcend the you know, the level of consciousness where if you lose the battle you need to fall on your own sword, you know, shifts to how do you face and hold the grief.
Mm.
Or should you just kill yourself, right? Like what's there after you lose the battle?
Right. It's wandering the desert.
Right.
Well, there's this whole like pre-post thing as far as like what is it's like the yeah, like what was mirage before you realized you were in the desert.
Yeah. I don't think you can successfully hold the evil, hold the aggression, hold the death, hold libido without going through the letting go, the dying, the grief, the hopelessness. You know what I mean? There's that
Mm-hmm.
phase,
No.
and you aren't. You know, the idea would be that in developmental psychology, it's like you're not an adult until you pass through that. You're in Melanie Klein's thing. You the person has to develop the capacity for grief.
Mm.
And so the way she puts it is, in my understanding of it, is that prior to that, uh, and Margaret Mahler, um, prior to that, it's a different, more primitive thing going on. You know, when we cannot accept, right? The toddler throws a tantrum. That, you know, the where there's an inability to accept whatever their frustration is, trying
Yeah.
that they can't have another cookie, you know.
Whatever's not aligning.
Yeah, and it's absolutely devastating, and the fire erupts and they throw this tantrum, and all hope is lost, which is a different level of consciousness than accepting the negative thing and grieving it,
Mm.
allowing the badness, allowing the pain, allowing what feels to you is not how you would have had it.
Right.
I mean, it's like, it seems so dumb and obvious, but like we are not very practiced, especially in modern society, at
Yeah.
like, you know, allowing like, what is it to accept the negative? What is it to lose? What is it to
And not let it just turn into spite or resentment or feed some narrative about how you think the world is, or like
right?
what's your ego construction about the way you exist in the world is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you got to find your own like place to grieve. I feel like grieving is so hard because like when it like comes up, it's like, well, is this the time? Or like, is it okay to do that here?
Yeah.
Like, there's not like a, uh, it's like at the same time you're like developing the ability to do it, you have to develop your own like container for it.
Yeah.
There's, it's not appropriate at every like dinner, you know?
Yeah.
So,
And the shift that happens that is so, I think, crucial. If you think of these levels, and it's a big simplification, but
that's what we're here for.
that's what we're here for. That idea that it's all here. So if each level, let's say each chakra there's a certain field, and that field is a certain color, it's a certain, you know, frequency range, and our psyche experiences it a certain way, right? And the idea is that it's there, it exists. You're not producing it.
Mm,
You're tapping into it. You're becoming aware of it. And so if it's just red and it's just aggression and it's just, you know, violence and destruction, it's like, well, that's pretty, you know, that's a certain experience. I mean, that's fire. If your room's on fire, there's that experience. And then it doesn't make sense to us that, well, you know, if you allow that fire in yourself, it just feels like, well, then you're gonna burn up, right? You're gonna be destroyed.
yeah.
Let alone what else you might destroy. And so it seems like, no, you gotta like repress it. You can't just let it. But the difference between that fire becoming an object in your psyche and you holding a form and then doing it is different than if you just let the fire exist as a field.
Yeah.
If it just exists as a field, it becomes non-threatening.
Right.
It simply warms the, you know.
Yeah.
And so I think depression and suicidality is a lot of that happens right there at that level between death and aggression.
Mm.
And the lack of it becoming libido that feeds the psyche. But again, it's like, well, a lot of people feel like, well, it's either suicide and depression, or it's I go on a fucking killing spree, right? Like they feel jammed at that place. They feel like those are the two options. And that sounds melodramatic, but you know, there's a lot of people that are at that.
Right.
And I'm saying, okay, but there's this phenomenon that can happen where you allow it, you allow the fire, and then it ceases to be that you need to go on a killing spree. It just becomes vitality, and it's there, and now, you know, it's not a problem.
Mm.
And then just all those different experiences, it's like if it can just be there. So at a certain point, shame, it's like, look, as I sit here, and believe me, I'm not saying I'm there, but it seems like the ideal would be, yes, I'm absolutely ashamed.
Mm.
You know, I fully admit that I, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
that my very existence here seems to be fueled by aggression and hunger and lust and neediness, and like that seems to be like, it's kind of like going, yep, I admit it, like I go to the bathroom, I do, I'm one of those people that, like,
every day.
yeah, I tried to hide it, tried to deny it,
Yeah.
tried to figure out how to stop, but I have to eat, and I gotta do these things that I kind of wish I could just leave behind, but
Yeah.
I can't seem to leave them behind.
Yeah.
But what happens when you just allow, like, yeah, I'm not saying it's
Good.
yeah, I'm not trying to justify. I don't even.
It's a good example. It's funny.
Yeah, and obviously at a certain point you start to recognize, well, your judgment of it doesn't even make sense.
Yeah.
You're judging it relatively.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Ultimately, I don't know if it's good or bad. I'm just saying it seemed bad when I put it in a certain context.
Like the living room.
Right. But right, to allow this stuff, like, yeah, I want to like eat stuff I'm not supposed to eat, and I want to take stuff I'm not supposed to take, and I like have thoughts and feelings that don't seem like the perfect human. It's like, yep, that's true. All that's true. And I want to be good, and I have
Right.
I have virtue, and I have compassion, and and so it's both.
Yeah.
But the more I just allow that, yep, I want to show up for the thing, and I also don't want to show up for the thing.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, that's fine. And then it's easier to show up for the thing.
Yeah. Right. Right.
There's less internal tension. And it's like the mind, like, well, which is it?
Yeah.
Are you
Yeah.
good or are
Yeah.
you bad? It's like,
Yeah.
both.
Yeah.
I don't know, neither. It's a dialectic.
Yeah.
But then you have conscious choice. But I'm going to go to the thing. Well, why? Because whatever, I feel responsible, or because I care about so and so, and it'll mean a lot to them.
Quit asking me all these questions. This hypothetical person questioning. I get it's a metaphor for the ego. I also like that there's just someone checking in on every decision you make.
Yeah.
Yeah, fuck you. I don't know. Like, don't you have somewhere to be?
Yeah. I'm out of time.
Okay. I'll end it. Yeah.
Do you, just real quick, do you feel, because I see you feeling into it, right? This idea of just let it be.
Yeah.
And instead of, okay, I got to make it go away.
Yeah.
It can just be, I'm a total asshole and I'm a really good person.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I feel like that's been a theme recently. I feel like in the last I guess year, I don't know, but yeah, I think when you talk about like being the degree to which you're like even aware of essence and a dimension, being like the difference between any level of acceptance of the confusional state around the dialectic.
Yeah.
And like how it's easy for me to forget, depending on the context, depending on the dimension. But there's some in talking about it now, at least with whatever dimension I was in, there's some shift in like the just allowing it. And it's I mean, it's profound every time. And it's like there's like grief co-arises with that too, like with the acceptance, like that's like you said, it's all there.
Yeah.
There's just like it's just this perpetual tragedy of acceptance, and it's um yeah, just like you can just I can just feel myself like tuning into like some different part of it.
Mm.
And there's like what you're talking about is kind of like this, like that they're all fields, and they're not like it's not one over the other, but like realizing that you can access those, but like knowing that they're there. Yeah, like you said, like there's more conscious choice to it.
Yeah.
Like if I wanted to grieve the fact that I don't always feel this way, I could. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, it's just like it's just tuning in instead of like, you know, maximizing it. Am I using that analogy correctly?
Right. Yeah.
The dimension approach list of computer and television analogies.
All right. Yeah, and there's conscious choice and there's play and there's creativity.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. There is like it's scripted as long as you're just like focused on one aspect of it, or
Yeah.
like trying to make it one or the other. Then it's predestined.
Right.
Yeah.